Hi, I'm back. This is moments after my King Killer Chronicles review reading thing, and I'm back again. I'm mostly recording another video today because I've been thinking about recording this video for a while, but also because I'm procrastinating. I have college homework due tomorrow and I have like 10 chapters to read. I love books. I do. I love stories. I hate literature. And I'm taking a short story writing class through the college, and he makes us read short story literature. To me, it's horrible. All the other members of my class are like, oh, the story was great, it was meaningful, it made my heart pound, and I'm like, it's dull. It's boring. How do you get that? But anyway, so I'm procrastinating, and I'm going to read you a little thing. This is Sandry's book. It's by Tamora Pierce. The series is The Circle of Magic. It's a quartet. It's a trilogy of quartets, if that makes sense. There's like 3 quartets, except the third quartet isn't complete. But yeah, there's The Circle of Magic, followed by The Circle Opens, and then the series that is known as The Circle Reforged, even though that's not its technical name. But, whatever. Tamora Pierce. I love her writing. Well, I love The Circle of Magic. She wrote this other quartet of quartets, I think, in the land called Tortal. I don't like them as much. I find most of them boring, especially, the Song of the Lioness. To me, that's just dull, and I haven't finished them yet. It's about these 4 unrelated characters that come together and they become family. Circle of Magic. Her writing is slower than some. Last time I read a young adult book with writing as slow and developed as this, I said it would be good for anyone to read, but nobody else really agreed with me. They said it was a girl book. So this could be a girl book, might not be a girl book. I think it's an everyone book. If you go to Mark Reed's, he reads all of the Circle of Magic books, the Emelon books, here on YouTube. And most of the Tortal ones, if you head over to his website at Mark Does Stuff, you can have him review each chapter of Tamora Pierce's books. In the first quartet, each book is named after a character, one of the 4 main characters. So this is Sandry's book, and here on the cover you can see Briar, one of the 4, and Sandry, another one of the 4, and that's the hub. Right there, the hub, and they're like on the roof of Discipline, which is this little cottage. Anyway, so I'm gonna read the first chapter, as I always do. If I remember right, the chapters are a little longer than, not terribly long, but gonna get comfy. Chapter 1. Sandry's book by Tamora Pierce. In the Palace of Black Swans, Zakdeen, capital of Hatar. Blue eyes wide, Lady Sangeline Fatorn watched her near-empty oil lamp, her small mouth quivering as the flame at the end of the wick danced and shrank, throwing grim shadows on the barrels of food and water that shared her prison. When the flame was gone, she would be without light in the windowless storeroom. "I'll go crazy," she said flatly. "When they come to rescue me, I'll be raving mad." She refused to admit that, with this room locked from the outside and hidden by magic, a rescue would be hopeless. I'll draw the mob away. Blah, blah. I cannot read. I'm sorry. I'll try this again. I'll draw the mob away from here. Far away. Parisi had whispered through the keyhole, speaking in her native trader talk. You'll be safe until the smallpox has run its course. Then I'll return for you. But her nurse had never returned. Right outside the door, the mob had caught and killed her killed her because she was a hated traitor. With Parisi dead, no one would even know where Sandry had spent her last days. Her light wobbled and shrank. If only I could catch it in something, she cried, like traitor wizards catch the winds in their nets. A net of string, she interrupted herself, and string is thread. She had thread in the work basket she had grabbed when Parisi dragged her from her room. The basket's contents had kept her from giving up completely before this, as she embroidered until her eyes refused to focus. She had thread aplenty and coils and in her work. I'm no maid, she argued, resting her head on one hand. I'm just a girl, a noble girl, worse yet. Like that maid said, good for naught but to be waited on and to marry. Good for naught, that's me. Tears filled her eyes, making the lamp flame quiver even more. Crying won't help, she snapped. I have to do something besides weep and talk to myself. She dragged her work basket over. Fumbling, she yanked out 3 coils of silk. 1 green, 1 pale gray, 1 bright red. Swiftly she arranged them, 1 in her lap, 1 on her left, 1 on her right. The light was down to a blue core and its wavering orange skirt. Gathering the ends of the thread in her left hand, she pulled them together in a knot, tying it as snugly as she could. Finding long dressmaker's pins in her basket, she pinned the knot to a barrel to anchor it. Her fingers shook, sweat crawling down her face. She didn't want to think of what would happen if this didn't work. Worse, there was no reason for it to work. Parisi, the trader and servant, had magic. Lady Sangeline Fautorn was good only to be waited on and to marry. Nothing to lose, she said, and took a deep breath. Nothing at all. Aboard the trader ships, their mages, called to the winds as if they were friends who could be invited to stay. Come on, she told the dying flame. Come here, won't you? You'll last in these threads longer than you will in that lamp. The lamp guttered. The flame was gobbling the last few drops of oil that remained in its bowl. The girl started her braid. The green thread wrapped around her fingers like strangling vines. The gray slithered to the floor like a snake. The thread tangled with itself. Umvumi, patience, it is everything. Parisi had often told Sandry. Without patience, magic would be undiscovered. In rushing everything, we would never hear its whisper inside. Uvumi, Sandry whispered in trader talk. She was straightening the threads, 1 on each side, 1 in her lap. Closing her eyes, she found that she was much calmer when she couldn't see her work, or the lamp. She didn't really need to see, to do something as easy as a braid. In her mind, her threads gleamed brightly. They caught specks of light from all around her and tangled in their strands. The flickering lamp went out. She opened her eyes. The wick was dead and black. Through and around her braid, light shone steadily, filling the room with a soft pearly glow. Did I know I could do that? She whispered. The braid light wavered. All right, she said, gathering her threads once more. But I have to sleep, you know. She wiped her eyes on her sleeve. With whispered Uvumi, Sangeline Fautorn went back to work. In the southern pebbled sea. When she sat up and looked at herself, Daja thought she was a ghost. Her skin was all sparkly white. Had an enemy Mamander turned her from a brown trader into a white one? Why on earth would anyone do such a thing? She ran her swollen tongue over cracked lips, tasted salt, and grimaced at her own foolishness. This was no Mamander's doing. It was what happened when a sea-soaked girl went to sleep and didn't wake until the sun was high overhead. She brushed herself off, salt flaking onto a makeshift raft. White grains got into a many cuts and scrapes where they burned like fire. Her family's ship was gone, sunk into the storm that their Mamander could not stop or get rid of. The traitor god Koma, known for peculiar acts, had chosen Daja to be the only one left alive, floating on a square wooden hatch cover. All around her lay a spreading pool of wreckage. She saw tangles of rope, and lumber, scattered crates, smears of color that were precious dyes from their cargo. Bodies also drifted there, the silent remains of her family. Daja's lips trembled. How long would it be until she joined them? Should she jump into the water now and end it? Drowning was quicker than starvation. Something thumped nearby. An open leather chest slammed against the mast. Again it thumped against the wood as water swelled, then flattened beneath it. She could just glimpse its contents, some bundles and dark bottles. It was what traders called a suraku, a survival box. They were kept everywhere on the ships. She had to get it. She prayed that its contents weren't soaked or ruined. Daja reached out. The box was beyond her grasp. She looked around for a long piece of wood to grab it. No luck. Water surged another slow roll, and a raft moved away from the wreckage. The box stayed behind. "No!" she cried. "No!" That was horrible. I'm sorry. She strained to grab that precious thing, though yards now lay between her and it. "Come here. Come on. I order you." She half laughed, half cried to hear such foolishness. "Come on," she whispered, as she had when she coaxed the ship's dogs to come to their food bowls. She was not very old, after all. She did not want to die. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She reached out and twitched her fingers as if she were beckoning to her pets. Later she would wonder if she had just imagined it, being crazy with sun and terrified of death. Now she stared, jaw dropping, as the box pulled away from the mast and floated towards her. It stopped twice along the way. Both times she wiggled her fingers, afraid to move anything else. Both times the box came forward until it bumped her hand. Very, very carefully she drew her prize into the hatch cover. It was indeed a suraku, lined with copper to keep the damp out and life in. The bundles were oiled cloth to keep their contents dry. The corks in the bottles were wax seals. Gently she felt through everything and grabbed a bottle. It took nearly all of her strength to wiggle the cork out. When it popped free, liquid sprayed into her face. Fresh water. Greedily she drank most of that bottle before she came to her senses. If she guzzled it all now, there'd be less for tomorrow. She had to save it. She fumbled to put the cork back in. Inspecting the other bottles, she saw that they also held water. "Thank you, Trader Coma," she whispered to the gods of deals and rewards. In the bundle she found cheese, bread, apples. She ate carefully, in tiny bites, lips cracking open and bled. All thought of the future had vanished, for right now she was gloriously alive. The suraku lasted for 3 days, might have kept her for 2 more if she ate less than ever. In that time she saw no sign of ships. It was still early in the trading season. Captains more cautious than her mother were still at port. Knowing her food was nearly gone, she tried to strike a deal with Coma and his wife bookkeeper Oti. "I don't look like much now," she told them, her voice only a thin croak, "but I'm a better deal than you think. I'm strong. I know most seamen's not, except maybe the pin sheepshank, but I'll work on that." She bit her lip. She didn't dare cry. It'd mean losing water with none to replace it. Far away, so far that it didn't seem real, she heard the crack of canvas. Was it a dream? Slowly she turned her head. She was in the trench of a swell. All she could see were the peaks of water on either side. Her nostrils flared. The wind blew as the trench she was in rose and flattened. New smells drifted into her nose. Breathing deep, she recognized the dull odor of brass riding on the back of the deep, rusty tang of iron. Metal meant people, didn't it? Metal, except for the bounds on a raft, and in the box at her side, went straight to the bottom without a ship to hold it up. "Ahoy!" A man's voice sounded over the water. "Ahoy! Are you alive?" "Yes," Daja cried. She kept a hand on her beautiful suraku. The other she stretched as high as she dared and waved carefully. If she fell in now, she was far too weak to swim. She lost track of time. It seemed like forever until she could hear the splash of oars and saw a longboat come alongside. In its boat sat a lean white man. His large dark eyes were set deep under thick brows and heavy fringe of black lashes. He wore long silver and black hair tied back. A trader to the bone, she noted that his yellow shirt and gray breeches were linen and were made and well made, not a sailor's usual cheap wool. "Hello there," he said, as casually as if they'd met at the marketplace. "My name is Nika, Niclarin Goldeye. I've been looking for you. I'm sorry not to have found you sooner." As sailors guided the boat closer, he reached for Dodge and pulled her onto the boat. Someone held a flask of water to her lips. "Wait," she cried, voice rasping. She fought to sit up. My box, there." She pointed. "Please save it." The sailors looked at Nico, who nodded. Only when they had brought the chest onto the boat and stowed it next to her did she relax and drink their water. In Hadra, Port Steve Sotat. The first time the Hadra street guard caught Roach with a hand in someone else's purse, they tattooed an X on the web of skin between his right thumb and forefinger, then tossed him into a big holding cell overnight. Nursing his sore hand, Roach went straight to the far edge of the chamber, where a watery beam of sunshine reached down from the opening in the wall. Patches of cushiony moss grew there. Sitting on the floor, Roach found that one of them made a fine pillow. Months later, a shopkeeper grabbed Roach as the boy helped himself to a few scarves. The Hadron street guard took him, tattooed an X on the web of his left hand, tossed him into the same holding cell. The moss had grown to cover most of the corner. It made a soft couch where he could sleep and wait to be released in the morning. Roach's current visit was his third. The guard had nabbed his entire gang of street rats in a jeweler's shop. Most of them already had 2 X tattoos, which meant they got no third release from justice. All of them were thrown into the great holding cell. His moss now covered the entire corner and a good amount of floor as well. It was the most comfortable bed he'd ever had, with room left over for the rest of his gangmates to use as a pillow. As others scrambled for a share of the slop the guard called supper, Roach whispered to his moss. "I won't be back," he explained. "Third time's cursed. I'll get the mines or galleys or shipyards. Lest I break out, it's for life." He smiled faintly. Life was a short thing now. No one lived more than 2 years in those places, and escapes were rare. For all that, he slept well. When he woke, it was judging day in Hadra. "Weevil," brayed the guard at the door. Roach's gangmate sat up. "Dancer, alley-cat, viper, slug." Roach hissed angrily. It was Slug that got them all in this fix, watching them steal instead of looking out for street guards. "Cheater, turtle, Roach." Roach hesitated. Should he make them come and get him? A guard cracked a whip, looking at him. Roach decided to avoid the beating he would get if the man had to drag him. With 2 X's on his hands, he'd receive plenty of beatings in the future as it was. "Thank you," he told the moss, and joined the rest of his gang. They were a quick march past the other cells, up a long flight of stairs. On level floors, the guards began to trot, urging the captives along with their whips. Roach was gasping when they were driven into the huge echoing chamber. A woman in the gray robes of a magistrate sat behind a long table. People in street clothes stood in back of her. Clerks sat at either end of the table, scribbling as guards and civilians testified against criminals. Roach ignored the testimony that concerned his gang. These grand folks had already judged him, so why listen to their cackle? When the testimony was done, the clerk called out, "Weevil." The gang leader was shoved in front of the judge. "Hands," he ordered. The guard slammed Weevil's hands down on the table, holding them so the X-shaped tattoos were visible. Like Roach, Weevil had 2 of them. "Mines," the judge said. A guard shoved Weevil into a wooden holding pin at the rear of the chamber. Roach shut out the rest as the law officers worked their way through the gang, and instead he thought of those plants in the cell, how peacefully green the moss showed when even the tiny bit of sun touched it. Give him a green like that from a living plant over the light that danced on emeralds. That was hard color. The moss glow was soft. The plant didn't seem to need much earth to grow in, though it liked water. He had given it part of his water ration when no one was looking. He didn't mind being good to growing things, but he did object when others made fun of him for doing it. Twin pairs of rough hands picked him up, then dropped him in front of the magistrate's table, jarring his ankles. He growled and fought as the guard dragged his hands out in front of him. He knew it was useless, but he didn't care. They'd remember him at least. The judge didn't look at his face, only his hands. "Docs," she said, and yawned. They were dragging Roach to a separate pen from the one that held Weevil and Viper, when a light male voice said, "A moment." It was not a request, but a command. The guards looked back. Roach did not. "May I see the boy again?" the man inquired. "Bring him." The judge sounded bored. Roach was hauled back to stand in front of a civilian. This was no lawyer or soldier. His long, loose overrobe was deep blue, dyed cloth that cost a silver penny the yard on Draper's Lane. It was worn open over loose gray breeches, with a pale gray shirt and good boots. He carried only a dagger. It hung next to the purse on his belt. This was a money bag, then, or an officer, someone big for certain, someone who wore power like a cloak. The bag whispered to the judge, who made a face. He held something before her eyes, a letter with a Bariban seal on it. That's a weird word, by the way. The judge glared at Roach, but nodded. The bag stepped away from her. "Their majesties are inclined to mercy, as you are but a youth." The judge rattled it off fast, a speech learned by heart. "You have a choice. The docks are exile from Sotat and service at the—" She faltered. The bag bent down to whisper. Long, gray-streaked black hair tumbled forward to hide his face. Roach wondered if he was looking for a cute little servant boy, and grinned. Men who liked play toys often regretted meeting him. The man straightened and looked around until his dark eyes caught and held Roach's gray-green ones. There was something in that black gaze, something that had nothing to do with human play toys. Roach's sense of power held in check grew threefold when he met those eyes. They warned and comforted at the same time. Roach looked down. "You have a choice of the docks or apprenticeship at Winding Circle Temple in Emlon," the judge went on, "until you take formal vows at the temple, or until its governing council rules that you are fit to enter society. Templar docks, boy. Choose." Choose? There were guards on the docks, nasty, wary fellows. What temple could hold a smart rat like him? Better yet, Emlon was far to the north of Sotat, fresh territory where no one knew who he was. "Temple," he replied. "Make out transfer papers," the judge told the clerk. "Master Niclarian," that was the blue-robed man, "will you take charge of him?" "Of course." For a moment Roach's heart raced. He might be able to run before he ever saw Emlon. Then he met the bag's eyes and gave up that idea. The man, Master Niclarian, looked too wise to fall for any dodge he might pull. "I can't make out papers for Roach," whined the clerk. "Not to a temple." "This is a chance, lad." Niclarian's voice was light in tone for a man's. "You can pick a name, one that's yours alone. You can choose how others will see you from now on." "Only as long as I stay," Roach thought. Still, the bag was right. Roach had never liked his name, but no one argued with the title the Thief Lord gave. "Choose, boy, and hurry up," snapped the judge. "I've other cases besides yours." The docks were too close to risk annoying these people. What name would Timberfolk like? Plant and animal names, that was it. He imagined robed men and women smiling at him and giving up the key to the temple gate. Like that's ever gonna happen, right? Plant and animal names. A picture flashed into his mind, a green velvet corner, but that wouldn't do. He needed a tough name, one that would tell folk he was not to be trifled with. He studied his hands, trying to think, noticed scarred welts across his right palm, a souvenir of a vine that grew on a merchant's garden wall. "What's them vines with needles in 'em? Big sharp ones that rip chunks out when you grab 'em." The bag smiled. "Roses? Briars?" He liked the sound of that second one. "Briar, then." "You need a last name," the clerk said, rolling his eyes. A last name? Roach wondered. Whatever for? The judge tapped his desk impatiently. "Moss," he said. "No one would think it was moss soft if he just didn't use it." "Briar Moss," said the clerk, and filled in the blank space on his paper. "Master Niclarian, I'll need your signature." Briar frowned. Master was a word for professors, judges, and wizards. The temple called women and men dedicate. Who was this man anyway? Cut him loose, the bag, Master Nick Lawrence ordered the guards. Your pardon, sir, but you don't know what he's like, growled one of them. He's born and bred to vice. Nick Lawrence straightened and caught the man with those black, powerful eyes. Are these remarks addressed at me? Roach shivered. Was the room suddenly colder? The judge drew a circle of protection in the front of her robe. The guard's face went as white as milk. His partner cut Roach free. Briar won't run, will you, lad? Nick Lawrence bent and signed the clerk's paper. Briar Roach sensed that the bag was right. Something about the man made escape seem like a bad idea. I'll stick till we've got to this temple place, he told himself. I can get lost there easy. In the city of Ninvar, in Chapchan. In the darkness of the temple dormitory, when she was trying to cry herself to sleep with the least amount of noise, Chisana Chandler heard voices. It wasn't the first time she'd done so, but these voices were different. This time she could identify the speakers. They sounded exactly like the girls who shared the dormitory with her. I heard her very own parents brought her here, dropped her off, said they never wanted to see her again. Chis was sure about that one. It was the girl in the bed on her right, the one who had tried to shove ahead of her in the line for the dining hall. Chis had raised a fuss, and the dedicate had sent the girl to the back of the line. I heard they passed her from relative to relative until there weren't any who wanted her anymore. Trish yanked at one of the coppery curls that had jumped out of her nighttime braid. She was fairly certain about this speaker, too, the girl whose bed was across the room and two more beds to her left. She had tried to copy Triss's answer to her mathematics question just that morning. The moment Triss had realized what was going on, she had covered her slate. She despised people who copied. Have you seen her clothes? Those ugly dresses? That black wool so old it's turning brown. And they strain at the seams. Fat as she is, you'd think she'd eat more at table. She wasn't completely sure about the last speakers, but did it matter? The voices seemed to come from every bed in the dormitory, to cut at her like razors. Why did they do this, the ones she'd never even spoken to? Because it felt good to be mean with no one to see and blame them? Because it felt good to sneer, as the group did, to go after targets their leaders pointed out? Her cousins were the same. They followed those who loved to make fun of the outcasts among them like ducklings chasing their mother. When her parents had given her to dedicate superiors of Stone Circle, she had thought she'd run out of hurt feelings. It seemed that she hadn't, after all. Triss clenched her hands in the sheets. Leave me alone, she thought, speechless with fury and shame. I never did anything to most of you. Don't even know most of you. No one noticed that the wind had picked up, jerking at the shutters on the windows, making them clack against their fittings. I bet her parents tried to sell her to traders. Maybe, but not even traders would take her. They won't think she has value. Everyone found this hilarious. One of the shutters hadn't been securely locked. It burst open, letting in a swirl of cold wind. The girls nearest to it screamed and jumped to close it. A gust of wind bowled them onto their rumps before it whipped around the room, pulling the covers off beds, scouring belongings off the small shelves. By the time it roared out of the room, all the girls but Triss were screaming. Two dedicates, their habits thrown on over their nightgowns, rushed into the room, carrying lamps. Everywhere they looked, there was a chaos of girls, beddings and knickknacks, except at Triss's bed. It was untouched. The girl in it stared at them with tear-reddened, defiant eyes behind the brass-rimmed spectacles that she had just finished jamming onto her long nose. The next morning after breakfast, they brought her down to the office of the Stone Circle's Dedicate Superior and left her in the waiting room. Beside her they placed a few bags, completely packed. She had not said a word. There was no point in it, and by now she knew how stupid it was to try to talk to someone who was determined to get rid of her. As she waited, staring fixedly at those battered leather satchels, she realized that the Honor Dedicate's door was not quite closed. I know that you're already on your way to Winding Circle, and I need you to take this girl with you. Is it such a hard request to grant, Master Nico? Send her later in the spring when the trade caravans leave for Emlon. The light, crisp male voice sounded annoyed. I'm on a very special task these days. If I have to change my plans suddenly, this child will only get in the way. We can't keep her. Her parents swore that she was tested for magic and found to have none, but... The delicate superior's voice trailed off. Briskly she continued. I don't know if she's possessed by a spirit or part elemental or a carrying ghost to be at the center of such an uproar, and I don't care. Wanting Circle is far better equipped to handle a case like hers. They have the learning, the dedicates who are more open-minded with regard to unique cases. They have the best mages south of your own university. They will know what to do with her. Hearing all of this, Tris felt sick. Spirit, elemental, or ghost-burdened was she? And what kind of fate awaited her? Some people learned to manage such creatures within themselves. Others got rid of them. Far too many ended up homeless and crazy, wandering the streets or locked in an attic or cellar or even dead. She swayed, feeling ill, then clenched her fists. She was sick of it. Sick of being gotten rid of, sick of being discussed, sick of not being helped. With a thundering roar, hailstones battered at the roof and walls around her, hitting wood and stone like a multitude of hammers. They shattered the glass panes of the window on the outer office to spray across the floor like icy diamonds. Clumsily, she knelt to pick up a handful. The door of the delicate superior's office swung open, revealing a slender man in his middle 50s. He stood there, hands on hips, black eyes under thick black brows fixed on Tris. From the floor she glared at him, hailstones trickling from her fingers. It's rude to stare, she snapped, not over her fury. You were tested for magic, he asked, his clipped voice abrupt. Why did the stranger taunt her? Her family would have put up with her oddities if only she had been proved to have magic, which might have been turned to the profit of House Chandler. By the most expensive mage in Nineveh, if you must know, and he said I haven't a speck of it. The stranger turned and looked at the woman in the yellow habit behind him. Honored Wren's Wing, I've changed my mind. I'll be very happy to escort Tristana to Winding Circle Temple in Emlon. He smiled thinly and reached a hand to Tris. I am pleased to meet you, young lady. She ignored the outstretched hand. Getting up, she shook out her skirts. You'll change your mind before long, she retorted. Everyone does. In the storeroom. Carefully, Sandry eyed her rightmost thread. There was the knot she had tied close to the end. Time to put on something new, she told the waiting darkness with a sigh. She was all out of green now. It had given her good service. Glowing with a clearer light than either the gray or the red, she would miss it. Yards of braid lay coiled from which she continued to work. She fixed her mind on it and on light completely, except for the times when she ate or slept or used the stinking barrel that was her chamber pot. Keeping light in her threads took all of her attention, leaving her without time or energy to panic. She groped behind her for her work basket and froze. Muffled voices cried out on the other side of the wall. The girl swallowed hard. Things gotten this bad? Was she going to start imagining people when they were not there? This way, dolts, a voice cried. Don't see anything, a man growled in the distance. The light in her braid paled. Don't you dare, she ordered in a whisper. She couldn't keep her mind on it. The glow died. Breathless, she waited in the dark. If this was a dream, she wished it would stop. You won't see anything, a crisp, educated voice snapped. Its owner might have been in the same room with her, or on the other side of the door. It was spelled for concealment. She clasped her hands over her mouth and started to rock. This is it, she thought. I've gone mad at last. Something entered the room, a wash of cool air that wasn't really air, more of a feeling of water than a breeze. Most of it circled over the empty sack she used for bed. A lone thread spun out of the cool mass, drifting across the room to twine around her shoulders. Now do you see it? The educated voice demanded. I want the locksmith. You got him, Master Nico. That deep voice also sounded very close. Metal scraped on metal. Air moved. She didn't know that the door was opening until it bumped her. Oh, to bless me, what a stink! The deep voice said. Move aside, man, the crisp voice ordered. Its owner, a light-colored shadow, stepped into the room. My child, my name is Nicklaran Goldeye. I've been looking for you. He raised the lamp that someone had passed him. The light struck her eyes, which had been in the dark so long. Pain made her scream and cover them. She would see almost nothing for quite some time. Yeah, the chapter was long. I'm sorry for that. My timer says that this video is running almost 40 minutes. I will see if I can whittle it down in the editing process, which isn't very much. My editing process is more me cutting out pauses. But anyway. Sandry's book, Circle of Magic by Tamora Pierce. Read it. I read it when I was 10 and I loved it. So